Welcome to VikeFans.com's exclusive series, Jay's All-Out-Blitz. A look inside the key challenges and issues facing NFL players and the Minnesota Vikings in 2013. And now, your host, former NFL linebacker, Jay Foreman.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Jay Foreman's All-Out-Blitz series. I'm Tom Moore, better known to most of you as Purple Pain. As always, I'm joined by former NFL linebacker Jay Foreman. And Jay, I know you're ready to get this last preseason game over with so we can play games that mean something.
Yeah, exactly. I'm excited for the last preseason game to hit those 4 zeros and then to get the real game started. I think everybody that's a football fan is going to be excited for this season. I think it's going to be a great season for the Vikings.
Well, Jay, after another rough outing by the Viking pass attack at Candlestick Park on Sunday night, I'd say we have some areas of improvement to discuss, and hopefully by the end of the podcast, we can convince the loyal Purple Legion to take a step or two back from the open window.
Yeah, the preseason could be very, very fickle. You could play really, really bad in the preseason and come out and light it up all season, or you could play really, really good in the preseason and stub your toe the whole time. So I think it's a little... You always got to err right in between. Don't read into too much, but also be on alert. Some things that you see during the game could rear its head during the season as well.
Well, as we talked about last week, the third preseason game, everybody focuses on that as being the one where the coaches, the players, and even the fans try to gauge where their team is for the regular season opener. And while the San Francisco defense is clearly strong, our passing game looked anemic again. And from what you saw, do we have a problem with the offensive line in Minnesota or the offensive coordinator Bill Musgrave's play calling or play designs he puts out there? Or is Christian Ponder not finding his receivers?
I know this is a generic answer, but to be honest with you, I think it's a combination of everything. Sometimes you'd see a young and upcoming great left tackle, Khalil, get beat. Sometimes you'll see a guard get beat. Sometimes you could question the play calling as being very vanilla and generic and very safe. And it's considering that Adrian Peterson only played 2 plays, you would think that he would try different things. And then also you see Christian Ponder sometimes looking confused, not very aggressive in his reads and also in his throws. So I think it's a combination of things. I think also Coach Musgrave is trying to build some sort of confidence in Christian Ponder and in his play calling, what he can and cannot do with Christian Ponder. So I think it's all a feeling out process. I envision them really doing some bigger and better things during the season just because they have more weapons now. It's just a matter of Christian Ponder getting in tune with everybody on the offense and the offensive line, gelling and not leaning so heavily on the running attack of Adrian Peterson.
You talk about the confidence level of Christian Ponder, and so many of the passing plays executed by this Viking offense are the 1-yard variety that yield very little positive yardage, not only on the initial catch, but even the yards after the catch. In your opinion, why wouldn't Minnesota want to utilize the medium and long-range passing game to spread out the defense some?
That's a good question. I think, when you throw a lot of hitches or quick hitches and fans don't get confused, sometimes those are what's called side adjustments. So if the cornerback is playing off, and if they have a running play called or if they have a passing play called, it's a side adjustment. It's just an adjustment to try to get the receiver the ball quicker, have him break a tackle, and pick up 6 or 7 yards after the catch to get into the ideal running downs and also passing downs, the second and short and third and short, where your efficiency rating goes up by 15-20%. I don't know why those plays are being called so heavily because they don't seem to be working. I think the only receiver that they have right now that can provide that real run after the catch is Jennings, and he hasn't gotten a lot of time or targets during the preseason. So I think it's just something that where they're trying to build that confidence up in Christian Ponder with the completion percentage for him to build up that confidence, and then hopefully during the season they'll start exploiting that middle of the field with Rudolph, and then also taking some shots down the field with Jennings as well.
Well, obviously, I'm a novice when I look at things, but when I see Ponder, he doesn't look like he has a rhythm in the pocket. To me, he tends to drop back, scan the field, and then hold the ball too long. In your opinion, why does he seem to have so much difficulty getting rid of the ball on time after working for the last 4 weeks with his receivers?
That's a good observation. I think it's just a classic example of him trying to play too perfect. There's an old saying, paralysis by analysis, and that's exactly what he's doing. He's overanalyzing the situation. They're running very basic plays, so the read shouldn't be very hard for him because they've obviously practiced against some defenses in practice that they're going to see in the game. His rhythm has been off. I think a little bit comes from confidence and the play calling, but then also confidence in himself. I think he's trying to not make a mistake he might be feeling a little bit of pressure from Castle, considering that Castle really has played well in the first 2 preseason games and played okay in the last one. So I think that he just needs to let it go. He needs to understand that the front office has everything put to the middle of the poker table on him, and he needs to do the same. He needs to understand he's going to make a mistake here or there, but the Vikings can't get to ultimately where they want to go if he doesn't step his game up, and he needs to step his game up like yesterday, and it needs to happen right now.
From your perspective, I know you don't play starters traditionally in the 4th preseason game. Based upon how that offense has looked, I know they're not going to play their starters in the game at all, according to Leslie Frazier. Would you play them a series or even a quarter to try to work on that rhythm in game situation?
No, I wouldn't do anything out of the ordinary. You don't want to get an injury that's uncalled for. I think I would let them go out there and play a series or really work them hard and warm up. I know from my experience, just as a defensive player, and obviously knowing what the offense is doing as well, I know they've been preparing for this first game starting this week. So, you're getting your practice routine down pat. You're getting reps against the scout team for this upcoming regular season debut. So I think they feel confident where they're at, and they need to just go out there and just keep it a status quo. The preseason is the preseason. It does mean some things, but it doesn't mean as much as people could think.
Well, you talk about injuries in the preseason, which really is perfect for the question that came to my mind. It's really NFL related more than Vikings related. This past week, when the Giants and the Jets played, Jets head coach Rex Ryan decided to insert his likely regular season starting quarterback Mark Sanchez in the 4th quarter in what seemed like meaningless time, and then Sanchez went out and got sacked and injured his shoulder. And as a result of that, Ryan's taken a ton of heat this week for it, and some are calling for him to be fired. Why would a coach take a risk like that late in a meaningless game, and should the failed decision cost Rex Ryan his job?
I don't think he should be fired. I think that in this day and time in the media, I think people are looking for any reason to fire a coach. I think it was an odd decision to put a 3-4 year starter in a playoff caliber quarterback, which obviously that's varying in opinion, but a quarterback's taking your team to the playoffs in the game with a lot of guys that potentially won't be on your team. He got hit, and that's the bottom line. The fact that he was in the game and got hit late is something that people can talk about, but the reality is he's going to get hit all the time during the season. He held the ball too long, and so he put himself at risk by his play. He took a hit before. Of course, the hindsight is 20/20, but I'm sure Rex Ryan would not put him in the game, but that just lets you know where Mark Sanchez stands as far as in the eyes of the GM, in the eyes of the coach, in the eyes of the players. Because if you have a guy that's the starter last year that you're even thinking about putting in after the quarterback that he's competing against played 3 quarters, that lets you know his tenure on the team is shaky at best, and that's just what happened. And it just so happened that he got injured, and it was very unfortunate. And so now the Jets quarterback situation is even worse than it was before the start of training camp.
As you know, all fans can get a little bit tentative and concerned, but in New York, they're pretty quick to the switch.
Yeah, it's a day-to-day. It used to be a day-to-day business. Now I think it's a minute-to-minute and decision business. So it's just something that Rex Ryan has to be used to being a coach in New York, and it's something he has to deal with, and it's something that can rectify itself if they start winning games. But this year it looks like the Jets might struggle a little bit.
Well, back to the Vikings, Bill Musgrave this week made kind of a surprise statement that gave us the impression that he might be considering keeping just 2 quarterbacks, Ponder and Matt Castle. And I know the New England Patriots are considering whether to do the same thing or keep Tim Tebow as a developmental 3rd quarterback. From your perspective, how risky a strategy is it to keep just 2 active quarterbacks on the game day roster?
It's only risky if you don't have that 3rd option. Luckily, the Patriots and the Vikings have that 3rd option, Tim Tebow and Webb. Webb brings a dynamic to this game that Castle and Ponder do not, and that's his feet. He's such a great athlete that they stuck him out at receiver and he caught a touchdown pass. What Joe Webb has that a lot of guys don't have, even Tim Tebow has, is he can help on special teams, he can help obviously on punt block, he can help in offense, and obviously he can come in as a 3rd quarterback. So essentially, yes, you're only going to have 2 quarterbacks in your game day roster, but you're gaining a player and a half in other phases of your game. And that's the way the New England Patriots are possibly looking at Tim Tebow. They know that he could possibly help them on special teams and possibly help them out on quarterback, then also help on the surprise plays, the trick plays, and stuff like that Tim Tebow's been accustomed to making, obviously at the University of Florida and with the Jets and the Denver Broncos.
Well, it's one of the questions we'll pose you on our Friday podcast. Will the Vikings keep 2 or 3? So we'll look forward to your answer on that one as well.
It's going to be interesting to see what happens, and there's always 1 or 2 surprise cuts after the last preseason game. So we'll see who it is, and if it's not on the Jets or the Patriots or the Vikings, it's going to be one team out there that's going to have a surprising cut.
Right. Well, NFL teams always talk about not showing much of their scheme during the preseason, and that way the opposition doesn't have much on film to game plan for them for the real games. Do you believe the Vikings' lackluster preseason so far is a result of that strategy, or do you think they're just not in sync yet, especially on offense?
If I could just look at the offense, I think the offense is struggling a little bit with the play calling being very, very vanilla, but then also they're not in sync. I think this week here of practice and also this game is going to be huge for the play calling. Obviously, Bill Musgrave is going to get more reps. He's going to see a lot more of his players. Guys that aren't practicing as much prior to this week are going to practice a lot now because they're going to be going into game mode. So they're a little out of sync, but I think the Vikings as a whole, offensively and defensively, have decided to be very, very vanilla. And I think they're trying to see who can really play the base defenses and offenses and go out there and really perform. But on the flip side of that, they haven't really performed well, and they came out flat. They came out, looked just discombobulated, looked confused, obviously, against Buffalo. So they need to make some strides this week in the beginning of the first or second series, and obviously going into that first game as well.
We got a question from one of the fans of VikeFans.com. This week, or really last week, there was a low blow to Kevin Williams on a block by 49ers offensive lineman Joe Looney. And the NFL came out and said, hey, we looked at the film and that's a legal block. Well, John from Chicagoland wants to know your thoughts on the play. Was this a clean hit? And should the NFL treat low blocks on a defensive player as serious as they try to protect their offensive players?
First and foremost, that, in my opinion, that was a cheap shot. It's one of those blocks that isn't called for. I don't understand the reasoning behind the block. I mean, I guess technically, by the language, it wasn't a legal block, but reality is that it was. It's uncalled for. Everybody will tell you that it was unnecessary, that an offensive lineman had no reason to block him low when Kevin Williams wasn't even going to make the play or even close to making the play, and he wasn't looking. As far as what the NFL does or what they should do, of course they should. They should hold the offensive players to the same standards that they hold the defensive players. And why I say that is just because you play defense doesn't mean that you're not open to taking a cheap shot or that you're defenseless just because you play defense. I think the fines should be just as high, and I think the game would be a lot cleaner. But right now, I think the NFL is always just erring on the side of let's find the defensive players and we'll just pat the offensive players on the back or on the wrist or slap them on the wrist. And I think you're going to see some animosity from defensive players here in the next, year or two, just because it's not fair and it's not right, just because they're not held to the same standards as defensive players.
When you were playing, if this had been somebody when you were playing with Buffalo or with Houston, and it was one of your players who made that block, would you likely come in their defense or would you likely say nothing?
If he's my teammate, I would come to his defense, but I would have a talk with him and tell him that is not uncalled for. Obviously, this guy is just a second-year guy going into a second year. He doesn't know the unwritten rules of the game. Oddly enough, I will tell you this, my career was derailed by a cheap shot by Kevin Maway, who was for, I guess, quite a few years the head of the NFL Players Association, which was odd because you see him talking about player safety, and he was known as one of the dirtiest players, and he cheap shotted me and snapped my leg in half. So I really think it needs to be cleaned up because you're going to see some more hits like the one that happened to Destin Keller. You'll see some retaliation. And quite frankly, it just looks terrible on the league. These type of plays aren't the ones that need to be on SportsCenter. The plays where you see guys making great athletic plays, touchdowns, even touchdown celebrations, that's what you need to see on ESPN. You don't need to see a second-year guy cutting 11, 12-year veteran, Pro Bowl or all-pro defensive tackle halfway across the field when the play doesn't mean anything.
When you look at the defensive secondaries, we kind of drop back in the defensive unit. Second-year cornerback Josh Robinson, he has blazing speed, but somehow he seems to be a favorite target for opposing defenses to pick on. He always has really tight coverage, yet is consistently beaten, especially on slant routes. In your opinion, what's causing that?
I think it's just his ball skill. It's just something that a young cornerback has to learn, and it's the last little intricacy that young cornerbacks learn from going from just an okay guy that's always there, that's always in the screen, to the perennial player, potentially all-pro player that gets interceptions, pass breakups, and makes big plays. So he's just learning. It's his second year. Guys are going to target the guy that doesn't have the reputation of being a good cornerback, and he's the starter that's coming in and replacing Antoine Winfield. So I think as the season goes on, like many young players, he'll start to perform better. He just has to make sure that he keeps his mind in the game and his confidence up in order to go out there and make plays.
So it's more the repetition he needs to get to the point where he feels confident to make a break on a ball?
Yeah, he just needs that one big play, that one interception that will give him the internal confidence that, hey, I can play with these guys. Right now, I think he's playing just to make sure that he doesn't get beat versus playing not to get beat at all. Of course, guys are going to catch balls on you. Of course, you're playing against the top athletes in the world. But once you play to make every single play, that's when you're going to see a guy making huge strides and obviously big plays.
With the final preseason game mainly focusing on backup players, Rob from San Diego wants to know what the starters are going to be doing this week to prepare for the opening of the regular season.
What they're going to be doing is first and foremost, they're going to want to get through the game without being armed physically. Secondly, they're going to want to encourage the guys that are fighting for spots to be their backup or fighting for positions to be starters. The veterans take it as a game where they can really help guys get through games, get through this last preseason game, and hopefully they come out and make the team. Because let's face it, the last 75 guys have been through this journey, most likely ever since the off-season program started. So there is a bond there. So it's not just the starters sitting on the sideline, eating hot dogs and waving at the fans. I think it's something where you build your team. You're going to see some guys that are younger that will help the team down the road, obviously help immediately. You'll see a lot of guys that will play in nickel and dime packages defensively that will be out there as pretty much starters and playing 3.5 quarters, four quarters, and go out and have a big impact during the season.
Well, given it's not always the most inspiring play this week because you've got the backups in, is there anybody that the fans should be focusing on this week who might be fighting for a position?
I'll probably say two people, and these are just very interesting guys. And there's one offensive guy and one defensive guy. Offensively, I would look to see what they do with Joe Webb. Do they mix him in at quarterback? Do they exclusively keep him out there at receiver? And does he participate in any special teams? Because that will give you a glimpse of what his role will be during the season. Because Joe Webb needs more reps at receiver, more reps at special teams, and we'll see if that's what they want for him. On defensively, I will go to Desmond Bishop. He played pretty good last week at 9 solo tackles. But, obviously before that game, they needed to see something in these last two games, which is the third and fourth game. So we'll see if they play him a lot or do they play him as a starter and just only play him for a first quarter or two. Because let's face it, he hasn't played football in over a year, so he does still need a little bit more reps than a regular starter just because he hasn't played. And so he needs to get his conditioning up, get used to contact, even though he is an established player.
So if for some reason they put Bishop out there for 3 quarters, it's not necessarily a signal that they're considering releasing him. It may just because they need to give him more time before the opener.
It might be, but also if he plays 3 quarters, it might be a symbol that they might be thinking about releasing him, and they're going with a younger guy. So it's going to be very, very interesting to see what they do. He's an established player. Looks like he's on the way back. It'll be interesting to see if they just roll with it and let him do his thing and get back at a slower pace, or do they try to push the needle a little bit and play him the whole game to really see where he's at?
Well, our last question tonight, I think you're going to love, Jay, because Berserker88 in Northern Iowa wants to pick your brain on linebacker strategy. So what he notices is that before plays, often the quarterback is barking out line calls, somebody like a Peyton Manning. You see it happening all the time. And then typically the middle linebacker counters with calls to adjust the defense. And he's heard before that they're fake calls, sometimes to give the opposition some trickery so that they can't solve the defensive audibles. What's really going on out there, and how much gamesmanship is happening with those audibles on defense?
I think as far as if I had to do a percentage, it's 85% real. The linebackers, or in particular the middle linebacker, is the quarterback of the defense. So if you hear a lot of jibber-jabbers and you see guys pointing and guys shifting, that is for real. Now, if you're playing against a guy like Peyton Manning who likes to do the gamemanship, that likes to have a lot of dummy calls, I would probably make it 50-50. I know defensively, a lot of guys and a lot of teams don't do a dummy calls just because you have 11 guys, and if you're playing defense, and especially if you're playing at home, that have to communicate, and there's no time to do dummy calls. So I think it's a high percentage. I know I never participated in a team or a defensive scheme where there was a lot of dummy calls, so I'd be very surprised if there was a high percentage of dummy calls being made out there. But, that's a great question.
Do your audible calls change week to week? So in other words, just say you said Blue 78, 1 week against, Indianapolis. The next week, do you change that so somebody doesn't pick up on your scheming?
Sometimes, but then also we use hand signals, and everybody in the defensive meeting knows we make checks based on formation or personnel. So it doesn't really change a whole bunch, but if you see somebody seeing you in a coverage, then you might change it up, and then you might change it just to a hand signal and throw them off base. But they have people watching it, and let's face it, the game is too fast and too competitive for them to really catch on to it. So I don't really see you changing it that much.
Well, with that answer, we're all a little bit more of an expert on audibling in the NFL. And that'll wrap up another edition of Jay Foreman's All-Out Blitz. And this week I want to thank the Residence Inn by Marriott on Geyser Drive in Colorado Springs for lending us a space to conduct this week's podcast. And I also want to remind you that Jay will return on Friday with a very special edition of the All-Out Blitz, where he will focus on which Minnesota bubble players he thinks will make the roster and those that may be released by this weekend. And don't forget to submit any questions you want Jay to answer in a future podcast on VikeFans.com. So until next week, I'm Tom Moore.
And I'm Jay Foreman.
So long, everyone.